UCLA has proven they're ready for primetime by making the DeShaun firing happen. But they can't make the same mistake twice.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcasts, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for your support. Welcome back, everydayers. What we're talking about today, UCLA's bold move to DeShaun Foster makes them move at least a couple of steps forward today. And who is Tim Skipper, the interim head coach? Let's talk about UCLA. I remember discussing with my UCLA buddies, we were tailgating out there on a Friday against New Mexico, and we're sitting there like, okay, if UCLA is to fire Foster, and it was to happen after this third game, they would have to do it. I didn't believe they were going to do it. First up, I didn't believe they would do it. They'd pay the money. They gave the buyout was pretty hefty for a coach that had no experience, and still, I didn't think they'd do it. It thought that, they'd be cheap. If you watched the earlier episode of Locked On UCLA, you saw Brian Smith kind of go after the UCLA administration and athletic department about how it was a cheap hire in the first place, unfortunately, because DeShaun Foster took over a mess left by Chip Kelly and the inability to fire him. Or the lack of, they just didn't fire him. That's really the problem when it was. So then UCLA gives DeShaun Foster a really crumbling program that still needed to tank some more before really hitting rock bottom. And here we are, rock bottom. But the fact that UCLA did it after 3 games, I remember saying this, and I'm going to say this again to y'all watching and listening, they are acting like they're a real program in a sense. A real program, a real school that cared about football would get rid of their coach after 3 games. Yes, it is the shortest tenure ever. Yes, it's a really short time when generally in the head coaching profession, you need time, you need patience. But you have to think about it. Gambling on the Nico Iamaleava and that leading to a circus and just making it a lot more scrutinized for UCLA. The lack of money generated because the Rose Bowl is empty. Now, that's not all DeShaun's fault, but they got to correct their mistakes of the past. And that's the big thing. UCLA doing this after the 3rd game heading into a bye week makes a lot of sense. It gives the players some time to connect with Tim Skipper, the interim head coach, which we'll talk about in a moment, but you had to make this move at risk of even more mediocrity, at risk of more complacency, or just, fan apathy, which is probably the worst it's ever been for the UCLA football program. All right. That's just unfortunately where it is. So doing this after the 3rd game signals, hey, we made a mistake and we're going to do this and fix it immediately. All right. And that's not fair to DeShaun, but it had to happen. Now, the problem is the reason why they're in this mess in the first place is because they made this move. They hired DeShaun Foster. They didn't go after Tony White. They decided, not even PJ Fleck was good enough for this job, which, he probably wasn't. But hey, think about it. Way back when UCLA was like, hey, look at it. Think about it. We're going to go after DeShaun and give him this contract, which had a decent buyout for DeShaun's purposes, not for UCLA's purposes, even though they refused to buy out Chip Kelly in 2023. They're trying to correct the mistakes of the past, but that doesn't ease or take away the aches and pains we had to suffer through from the winter of 2024, the early part winter, heading into now where we're drifting into fall 2025. It's barely a full year and a half, if you will, a little more than that for DeShaun Foster. That's how big of a mistake that set UCLA back. Because instead of hiring the right guy and giving him now a 2nd year heading into a 3rd year to rebuild, they gave someone no experience heading into the Big Ten a massive, massive job to do with limited experience. And that's why sometimes experience resumes do matter for UCLA. And that's why we're going to hear the names of the Tony Whites of the world thrown out there. We're going to hear the potential buyout options if Kalen DeBoer is dropped by Alabama if he doesn't have a season. According to Alabama's expectations, a big name would be Kalen DeBoer. I've already gotten the text from my Oregon friends saying, hey, don't even go after Will Stein. Don't even touch him. The Oregon offensive coordinator, that has rejuvenated the career, if you think about it, of Dante Moore. And Dante Moore couldn't even do anything with Chip Kelly and UCLA his freshman year. And look what he's done out of Oregon in those first few games with Will Stein. So you've got a defensive coordinator who went after the job last time. You've got an Oregon offensive coordinator who's got experience and could be up and coming. He's been under Dan Lanning's wing these last couple of years. You've got a big name coach. Obviously, Jed Fish was a guy, if UCLA decided to make a move a long time ago, could have hired Jed Fish the first time. Maybe could have done it a second time. I'm not sure he'll be interested in the third time, considering he's on the verge of potentially breaking through with Washington, heading into his second full year, into what will be his eventual third full season. Or do you go with the up-and-comers? Do you go with the retreads like Dan Mullen trying to get his foot back into the head coaching stuff after being an undefeated start with UNLV? Or do you go on an up-and-comer with Jason Eck, who I'll discuss with Sean Ryder in the next full episode of Locked On UCLA, who covers New Mexico? There's many ways to pivot, all right? But you need somebody with energy, with cachet to excite the fans. And now UCLA was hurt. And the reason why the Coach Foster hire happened was because the previous regime went after Chip Kelly. They said, you know what? We're going to pay a lot of money to get rid of Jim Mora. All right. We're going to bring in a big name guy. And Chip Kelly was the big name guy. And UCLA won that battle. And he didn't want to do the job. It's unfortunate. Now, correcting a mistake shouldn't be completely applauded, but it shows that UCLA respects, I don't know if respect's the right word, but they acknowledged what was going on and decided to do something about it. Now, it helps that there's a new chancellor in place in Julio Frank that probably forces Martin Jarman to, be a little quicker about these decisions and say, hey, let's do it. Sometimes you got to spend money to make money, and sometimes you got to cut your losses. And they had to cut DeShaun Foster from the head coaching position. And I hope he's still remembered as a great Bruin, and we can just kind of just scoot past this head coaching nonsense, because it is not his fault that program is fully where it is at this moment. But the Nico nonsense, of course, he decided to go after Nico. How this team is going, some of the unfortunate media mistakes, they will be knocks on DeShaun's resume, but he was put in a horrible position. But UCLA acknowledging, saying, no. We made a massive mistake. That's part one. That's a small step forward, a good progression that they did now. Because I definitely thought that they would be like, you know what? We know it's a problem. Let's just wait for it and see what happens and maybe convince ourselves into year 3, even though that was clearly not the right move. They said, no, we're doing it now. And this is the right chance to get our players rejuvenated for the rest of the 2025 season and keep our fans engaged and interested to keep watching this team this year. Because as much as we're already looking at 2026, these players, they need some support. They need to grow and prove that UCLA is worth coming to in 26 with players that may return in some spots, and that, hey, it can be turned around with the right man at the job. All right. And the right man to lead this team as the interim skipper, if you will, is Tim Skipper, because he just did that with Fresno State. So let's talk about who Tim Skipper is, if you remember the name, or don't, next on Locked On UCLA. Quick question for all you college football fans out there. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, what hat would you be wearing? Yes, I said hat. For me, it would be the game, because these aren't just hats. They're the same vintage styles that the fans wore back in the 80s and 90s. Remember the glory days of UCLA football, the cool styles of yesteryear. And I've looked at the GameCap.com, all right, the GameCaps.com. They've got cool UCLA gear, hats, other things as well. Go there and use the code LOCKEDON to get your vintage hat for $16.99. Again, thegamecaps.com. Grab your team's classic bar retro circle design and use the code LOCKEDON for an exclusive discount, because legends wear the game. Cruising on, we're talking a little bit about Tim Skipper, the incoming interim head coach for UCLA for the rest of the 25 season. So think about it. This is a guy that was pushing for the Fresno State job, because he was named the interim coach for the 24 season, coached the Fresno State bowl game in 2023 when Jeff Tedford had to step away for health reasons. And if you followed the Fresno State program a little closer, like I have the last few years, last decade, you've seen that Tedford had, he's done that a couple of times where he just stepped away due to health reasons. And then Tim Skipper was given an opportunity to coach this team to, in a tough situation. won a bowl game against New Mexico State, turns around and gets this team bowl eligible, right? This is not the Kalen DeBoer-led Jake Haener team or the Jake Haener team that won the Mountain West title for Fresno State a few years ago. This is a guy who, was ready to help lead his team into the next level and took over a tough situation. He went 6-6 in the regular season, split the bowl game, so a 7-7 overall record. Brought it in mid-July in Fresno State. Now, after coming from Fresno, literally coaching on the opposite sideline against UCLA to wrap up the Bruins regular season in 2024, if you remember, it is intriguing and frustrating to see how he's already on the UCLA sideline and how he's been given another opportunity. But he's already done this before. So this is why he's the right man for the job. And we'll see how it plays out. I don't think that there's a world where he can turn it around to the point that UCLA would even consider hiring him. And I don't think that's on anybody's radar. He's a guy that is trying to right the ship, put this team to a respectable finish in 2025. And the most important thing this year is getting a win or two. So this isn't a winless team, because the UCLA team has not started 0-5 since like the 1940s outside of 2018 with Chip Kelly. All right. Which just makes it all the more embarrassing that they gave Chip Kelly all that time to let him walk away for nothing. They didn't have to pay him, but they paid him a lot, gave him the resources of sorts, and then they let him walk away for nothing instead of buying him out, firing him. And then you gave DeShaun in a new time where he has to manage a whole bunch of new things, the House settlement, the new Big Ten conference, how to manage a roster that was crumbling, and they didn't do it. So it's Skipper's job to come through and battle, all right? Battle for Skipper, all right? Here's the big thing. Can he get a win against Northwestern? If he gets a win against Northwestern, I think there will be a little more intrigue to this team going forward other than just Tennessee fans bashing Nico all year long. 2, I think Pete Nakos of On 3 pointed this out. The transfer window's open. And you've got guys who through 3 games can redshirt if they can, maintain eligibility, and sit down. Is this a chance where you see a lot of youth playing and they develop a lot more? So it could, unfortunately, get even uglier. Better effort, maybe better schemes, different energy, different voice, but they might be younger, smaller, and less experienced. And you wonder which of these guys might take that option to, I'm going to redshirt this year and not burn it on this team if they had that available to them. Obviously, Nico, as a redshirt sophomore, he wants the ball out and make sure this season is better for his potential NFL draft stock. So there's a lot of guys playing for individual things, team goals, whether it's the transfer portal or the NFL draft. There's a lot of reasons to play. And now Tim Skipper has to manage all that and also put himself in his own position for a new job, because there's no guarantee he's going to be brought on by the new staff. Very, 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 very minimal chance he's even looked at for this head coaching job. It would take an absolute miracle for that to happen. But he also wants to position himself in the right job. But then the focus is, if you're looking all individualistic, you got to think as a team first mindset. He's got to go in that locker room and say, hey, this is tough. And you've seen some of the players defend Foster and say, thank you, coach. Thank you. Players first, taking chances on him. But he's got to go in that locker room and tell these guys, hey, you're not playing for your portal. You're not playing for your NFL draft stock. We're playing for, as a team, as a unit, respectability. And that's not necessarily going to mean a bowl or 5-7 finish overall. Even that would be a miraculous stretch. It's to come together, improve, and be competitive and make this team one that's worth rooting for the rest of the year. Because it's hard for even the rest of the country to root for UCLA, because they are all mad about the Nico Iamaleava situation. And the UCLA fans, let's be real, are all frustrated on how this has played out, leading to DeShaun Foster having to be fired after week 3, when not everything was his fault, but it was trending in the wrong direction. So Tim Skipper's the guy who's done it before at Fresno, and we'll see how it plays out moving forward in the rest of the season. I hope UCLA, I think an over-under could be, for win total, 2.5, and that would be a little rough stretch to get there. But if he does something miraculous, it could be an upset, a win to remember if they can get a couple of wins and also beat USC. Because if that happens, we can always celebrate and say, yeah, forget you. That's our goal. Couple of wins, beat SC. That is the goal this year. Anything else is just gravy. Getting a couple wins, getting 3 wins would be gravy. And depending on who you beat, they could be extremely, extremely special. All right. We're going to be here. We're going to detail all the coaching searches, give more names, a little more background, kind of dive in to what it could be, talking about the upcoming UCLA football coaching search, which will be a long, lengthy, or, a super enticing job potentially, a lengthy research, and we'll see what happens. All right. Heads up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.